Thomas and Agnes, says, in everything that you've made and that's been published, what is the worst thing you've created? What made it terrible? I look back at some of my things and I die a little inside. Thomas, I'm gonna say that's really, really common. I look at some of my early Mythbusters stories and I can see the narrative meat I'm leaving on the table. I can see the lower level of sophistication I had about how to service this narrative on the fly. And there was a long period where, yeah, that dying a little inside was something that happened. But as I get older, I have learned to be more forgiving of the young version of me. We are all, as we are developing into humans, as we are, coming out of puberty, as we are going through puberty, and in the middle of which they give us apartments and cars, and we have to run our own lives. We make all kinds of terrible mistakes as human beings in our late teens and early 20s. We make mistakes that hurt ourselves. We make mistakes that hurt people we love. And like many people, for a long time, I held a kind of uncharitable view of the young version of me that lived in New York. I didn't think much of the kind of friend that I was back then. I didn't think much of the kind of boyfriend I was back then. I didn't think much of the artist. And I have come around to seeing more clearly the groundwork that young version of me was laying down for myself. That I'm really happy with how things have turned out. And thus, I have to accept that how things have turned out is a result of everything that has happened. In 2022, I got to go to New York and teach a J-term class at NYU with my friend Ellen Horn, and it was really, really amazing experience. And I spent 3 weeks living in New York City for that shoot, for that class. And it was the first time I'd spent more than a week in New York since I left in 1990. And spending all that time really, really put me back into the rhythm of New York. It made it really clear to me that I have found my home here in San Francisco, and that I don't think anything would drag me back into New York City to live, despite how much I love that place. But I also started listening to music as I was riding my one wheel around the streets. I started listening to music that was the music I was listening to in my apartment in Brooklyn in the late 80s. I had an apartment on Carroll Street and in Park Slope. And, I was listening to some weird stuff. I was listening to a lot of Paul Simon and Simon and Garfunkel and stuff like that, but crap tons of the Talking Heads and Laurie Anderson. Tons and tons of Laurie Anderson, Ricky Lee Jones. And I was listening to this music and it was reminding me that, that kid who was listening to Laurie Anderson in his weird Brooklyn apartment in the middle of the night, watching black and white television, playing Pong and crap. It's like he was laying down the foundational aesthetic points of view for this guy. So this is the longest way, Thomas, of saying maybe in a few years, reassess, and you might be more kind to that young version of yourself. Ryan Massey says, when creating, I often find the process is a compromise between my ambition and the limitations of my skill and tool set. That is a succinct description of everything that happens in here. Thomas is always surprised by projects that come out perfectly. You and me both, brother. 100%. What are some projects like that for you? Look, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon Sword was so long in the making because I could not figure out where my skills intersected with the object that I wanted to achieve. I knew I didn't want to just CNC this thing out of a material, but I didn't quite know how I was going to carve it. And then when the pantograph mill showed up, it still took me a couple of weeks before realizing, that can solve the problem I've been sitting and gestating about for a decade. Yeah. I will tell you something about the stuff that comes out better than you thought. In my experience, when I make something and it turns out better than I thought, it is always like a magic trick and I'm the audience. And by that I mean that my experience of some of the objects that I have made, some of the ones that I think are truly spectacular objects, like the chair with holes in it, that I forget that I made it. I'm able to forget that I made it. I'm able to experience it as an object irrespective of the fact that I made it. And that, that is like, that's really satisfying. Because like that object keeps surprising me over the years. Like some of the stuff I made in my early 20s, I still have hanging around here, and they still move me as a person. They move me aesthetically. Yeah. But dude, I think that is literally the process of exercising your point of view. It is a compromise between your ambition and the limitations of your skill. Jeff Tweedy once told me that rock and roll was the tension between what the musician wants to achieve and the crappiness of their instruments. Because at that point, he was buying a bunch of Czechoslovakian electric guitars, which barely stayed in tune. And he thought that was deeply rock and roll, and I really, really get that. Dreams of Habit says that they recently found out that their 9-to-5 is ending in about 18 months. Their dream goal is to make things out of their workshop for future income. Do I have any suggestions for making the transition successfully, or what things I should be concerned with at the beginning? Ooh, yeah. I have this interesting thing in which I've been freelance almost my entire working life. I had a desk job for about 18 months in the latter 90s. And it was the job that taught me that I need to be freelance, that I want more variance. And yet, I cannot recommend the freelance life because it is really difficult. You are wondering about making things out of your workshop for future income. Among the things that I would say are necessary for achieving a reasonable income from making things are to identify. Is that wind blowing out there? Oh, someone rolling something big and crazy. Okay. What markets are there out there? When I was first building my shop here on Bartlett Street in the Mission, I was looking at, there was the film industry, there was the commercial television industry, there was print advertising, but then there was also other markets like toy prototyping, window display, theater prop construction, film prop construction, which is different than television commercial production or film production. These happen at different points. And seeing ways in which I could service any one of these markets. It's not just enough to know that toy prototyping exists. You got to find someone who wants to pay you to make toy prototype for them. Some of these markets can be ludicrously lucrative. Making props for dinner theater, you're never going to make money doing that. But it is a great way to build experience. I don't know what you were planning to make. What I was making was props. So when I worked with theaters, I would often use those opportunities to build stock. So I would build stuff for free because theater has no budget and never will. And I would make stuff for free as long as they paid for materials and I got to keep the piece at the end. And I still have some of the props I built back in the early days sitting around because I was really glad to get those objects back. When I was freelance, every day that I was not actively executing a job for a client was a day I was spending looking for other clients. I would look at people that I'd worked for in the past 4 years and think, okay, is there anyone I haven't talked to in the last year about how they're going? And I would call them up. Hey, how's it going? Just to catch up. Even work at Industrial Light and Magic was all freelance in the model shop. Almost nobody had a permanent position except for the management of the model shop. So there was a lot of that kind of gaming the system up there of like, okay, I'm out of work. I'm going to go up to the shop and I'm going to take one of my old supervisors out to lunch because we're friends and that's fun. But also it puts me on the map of their mental map of like who's not working right now and could be hired. It's a very different reality to execute stuff for clients than it is to just make stuff alone in your cave for yourself. It's a significantly different reality. And If making for yourself provides a lot of succor for you, you're going to want to consider, I think, some kind of separation of church and state. Like, no matter how much work you have to do for the client, make sure that you are saving some of the workbench space and some of your mental space for your own projects. Because I think burnout occurs specifically when you're executing so much in one zone that all the other zones get neglected, especially those personal and creative zones. And when I am tired and I am also not feeling like I've gotten to stretch my aesthetic wings at all, then stretching them for work would become even more difficult. If you are going to be making things out of your shop to sell, it is vital that you know what the market for those items actually is. So it's about, if you don't know people in the industry or in the line of work that you're in, finding them, talking to them, interviewing them, figuring out what the market will bear. When you are bidding a job, in my estimation, your goal is always to bid about 10% over what the client was hoping to spend, given that their budget is within reason. The worst sound when you give a bid to a client, okay, this is going to be a $4,000 job. The worst sound when you say something like that is them go, okay. that it's always like, crap, I left money on the table. It is a beautiful thing. It has been a beautiful thing for me to be freelance for much of my life. It allowed me, and I realize when I'm talking about this, that Mythbusters was a permanent job for 13 years that I did almost 40 plus weeks a year daily. I get that. It still felt like freelance when I was doing it. And no matter how successful the show was, you could all end the following season. So I always had to be kept thinking, what's next, what's next, what's next? But the freedom that being freelance has given me is inestimable. The freedom to spend tons of time with my kids while they were growing up, to be present and with them. I never missed dinner with them. Being freelance engendered that kind of existence, and I'm really grateful for it. Chris Hogby, 4066, says that they're making a fire poker post, and the client wants a 5-foot one. But Chris is all set up and thinks that the best length is 3.5 feet. What should they do if the client wants the 5-foot one? Chris is calling it a subpar job. What should I do if my client wants a subpar job? Should I just give them the tried and true product, or should I give them what they want? Yeah, you got to give them what they want. You got to deliver the client what they want. That's the, yeah. You can editorialize, and then you have to let it go. You should editorialize. If you have an argument for why the 3.5 feet is better than the 5 feet, before you delivered them the 5-foot fire poker post, you should say, may I tell you why I think this might not be the best approach? I have an idea about the best approach, and I'd like to tell you why I think it's the best approach. And then explicate it clearly. And they may listen to all of that and be like, yeah, no. And that's the reality. You got to deliver what the client has asked for. Do not fall into the trap of really wanting the 3.5-foot version so much that when you deliver the 5-foot version and they're like, oh, now I see what you were saying. Hey, can you change it to the 3.5 foot? That should cost them. And I don't mean like as a punishment, but when you explain, hey, I think the 3.5-foot version is better than the 5-foot version. And to be fair, if you hate the 5-foot version, we can switch to the 3.5-foot version, but here's what it's going to cost in time and money. That should be a very clearly laid out thing before you begin. Because you don't want to be like, have him go, nah, I like the 5-foot. And then when you deliver it, he's like, oh, could you do it? Can you do it? And like, he gets a deal for like coming up with the wrong thing and not listening to you. No. You gotta charge accordingly. Thank you for watching. I wanted to talk to you about Tested membership. The Tested members are a key community that we find really, really remarkable. That's very separate from Tested and from YouTube. The Tested members, they buy each other memberships during our live streams. So if you're wondering whether to become a member, watch one of our live streams and someone may just give you one. It is hard to overestimate how much the Tested members actually make possible on this channel. They give us a lot of wiggle room. They give us a huge amount of feedback.
That's a member right now.
Thank you so much for enjoying your membership. Description for everything you need to know. And for all the members out there, thank you, thank you, thank you.